But if they don't want to know, fuck it, let's talk about the weather. Because the only thing that forcing that...
I think Tucker
Hello, hello. This is Lyndol Descant. Welcome to Music as a Metaphor. Today we're live. It's May 7th. And it's been a few weeks since I've been live, so it's nice to be here today. Got lots to talk about today, actually. But one of the main things we're going to start with is what's been going on the last few weeks, why I haven't been here, and some of the conclusions that I've come to. And of course, as always, I'm still singing. This is Lyndol Descant, and let's get into music as a metaphor. So that's my theme song, music. It's not actually mine, but I've been using it for this show because the tagline is, how can I keep myself from singing? And this is an idea that I've gotten reinforced lately, this idea of if we were all truly living our highest and best lives, that singing is something we all do. It's just part of our human condition. It's part of our human nature. It's just the same as talking, really. It's just another way to express ourselves. And it's one of the things that I've had a hard time with in this world, the music industry, and sort of coming from this idea that only certain people have singing voices. I've gone into that in some of my previous episodes, so won't go so much into that here today at this moment, but I have been reinforced with that idea. And I personally, when I'm feeling my best, I truly can't keep from singing. I love singing, and it feels like a feedback loop. Like the more I sing, the better I feel, and the better I feel, the more I sing. So that's what that song is about. And unfortunately, I haven't had the time to mix that or add more to it. It's been about the same mix for a while now, maybe a month. Because last month was crazy. April was absolutely crazy for me, especially post-eclipse. And I think I might have jinxed myself now that I think about it. I came on here being like, oh, we made it past the eclipse. And that might have even been the episode that just glitched out. So somehow, when I'm looking back at the last month, the last episode that came through very clearly, I think, was April 2nd. And then I did do an episode on April 9th, and I believe that went through. That's my episode. It was on April 9th, but it's episode number 8. And I believe that is the one where I said, we didn't die in the eclipse. And after that, I've had a lot of trouble getting these up here. So that last episode 8, is the last one you'll see up on my YouTube, which I'm trying to follow up and put the episodes up on my YouTube if you can't catch me live. But the very next week, the 16th, I did a full episode. Feel like it was pretty good. And the whole thing just glitched out. I found out later that somebody listening, it just glitched out in the beginning, came back at the end. When I went to listen myself, which all of these are being recorded by our station, and that's what I'm using to post later on, there wasn't even a recording. And then interestingly enough, there's no longer a recording on there for April 9th either. Now, the following 2 weeks after that, I had planned some travel, and I was working to be able to just come just remote, do a live from a remote location. And while I had trouble with that, on top of that, I realized I had actually planned, and I kid you not, my air travel right at the time that I should be live. So I'm definitely not technically savvy enough to try to broadcast from an airplane at this point, although I'm sure you probably could. I have no idea. So I did barely get together a pre-recorded show for the 23rd. And then last week, the 30th, I just couldn't get it together. So that was a rerun last week. And now I'm here back today, and I'm so full of insights. It's been incredible, because part of what spooked me a little bit was on the 16th, almost the entire episode, I was getting into some really deep spiritual warfare topics. And after that happened, I really couldn't tell if it was it was one of two things. Either I was over the target, and this is what happens when you try to get the good word out, the good news. A lot of things come against you. Most easily, technology, right? It seems like the most easily manipulated by certain forces, as some sort of in between this world and the next. Sometimes technology feels like that to me. So anyway, it was like, did it glitz out because I actually said some pretty truthful things, and this was, not. This was a sign of that wasn't able to get out there because I was so right on, or was it for another reason? And this was what I needed more time to think about. And that was that I'm here mainly to talk about music as a metaphor and using music as a spiritual practice to come into alignment with who you're truly meant to be. Now, in that alignment, my full disclosure is that means developing a personal relationship with Jesus, and you yourself opening up to greater and greater truths. But I don't feel that that's my place to dictate that to you. I feel like if I just can help you to get out of some of these lower frequencies, that you'll be able to find all the answers for yourself. So I'm very careful about not putting forward too many of my opinions that it might block somebody from hearing the advice or what I have to offer through my, however, 25 years now of working with music in this way, that I might block somebody just because we don't agree with something. But it's something that doesn't really matter from a bigger perspective, right? And that bigger perspective being just the idea of all of us getting back into alignment with our true power, who we really are, our authenticity. From that place, it's a place of unity, and we're able to communicate with each other. But I feel, in a way that we can still have differences, and it doesn't matter. We're still united in our purpose. That's a place I want to come from in this show. And so sometimes I feel like maybe I need to be very obedient about what topics I bring up here, because it's wonderful to sit here and have an outlet to discuss all the things on my mind. And in many ways, that's how the Spirit works, right? It's like a podcast I heard the other day mixed with something that happened in my personal life, mixed with an insight I had when I was praying. All those things ideally come together to help me to offer something in the moment. But I'm really only here for that. I'm really only here to serve and to help, and not to glorify my own personality and my own life. But the truth is, the only way I think you can really do that is through your personal testimony, because none of us, I'm speaking on things today that go beyond what our logic is able to really talk about. And I think that's a purposeful thing. I mean, I think it's on purpose that it's so difficult to talk about these topics without running into areas that we can all agree and disagree and get distracted in. So I want to first mention that, because I am trying to walk that line. And I've had to walk that line for a very long time, because for many years in my teaching career, it was clear to me, you are here to teach music as a metaphor. You are not here to talk about your own personal beliefs. You are not here to even share the gospel. I didn't even feel like I was qualified. I definitely wasn't, actually, because I feel like the news of the gospel, or understanding the gospel's message, I've been late to the game on that one. But it's more about living it regardless. And, and to put that in my music, that frequency in my music. And for many years, it was a sincere searching for that. It was a sincere intention to heal so that I could find that, but I knew I was falling short many times. So if I had gone around and say, hey, I got all the answers, do it this way, I would have misled a lot of people. So I'm very happy that the Spirit held me back. I'm very happy that I was humble and recognized that with most of these people I was working with, I was meant to strictly speak about music with them. And that was it. They didn't need to know my personal thoughts. They didn't need any of that pushed on them. What they needed was an exposure to a wonderful way to open themselves up to their own creativity and their own imagination and their own answers, to raise their own frequency, to give themselves a form of self-expression that would help them to get to know themselves or to heal their traumas. Whatever it was beyond me. I wasn't supposed to comment that like, I know, and I'm going to tell you what to do. I was never supposed to be a guru, and I don't want to be a guru now. But I have felt called from the Spirit to be more open about things, to discuss things more than just beyond a technical musical perspective. And part of that had to do with the fact that at the beginning stages of COVID, I was invited to be on Magenta Pixie's YouTube channel. I don't know if you know Magenta Pixie. She's got a pretty big following in the alternative New Age world. And I had already by that point kind of outgrown a lot of New Age people, but Magenta's message always really resonated with me. And in particular, I had sent her some music, and she had used some of my music in some of her episodes previously. And her husband, Cat's Magic, I just really always connected with as well. So when she invited me to be on the show, it was a wonderful opportunity for me. And I, once again, found common ground. It wasn't about, at the time, it was tricky because it was leading up to Donald Trump. And there was a lot of people in the New Age community that had been neutral that were suddenly becoming very political. And once again, I felt very, especially coming from Brooklyn, that it was very important that I did not allow politics into what I was doing with people, that I wasn't, that seemed like a distraction, a division. And so at that point, Magenta was kind of stepping into that world, and I didn't want to go there with her. But I also had my own beliefs, and it was very tempting. And at the time, I remember holding back from that and trying to hold the line with just talking about what I knew I was supposed to talk about, and stopping myself from letting my tongue just go on topics that it was maybe a waste for the public. It's a waste of the listener's time, because it doesn't matter what I think about certain things. I'm not an expert on those things, and I don't want to take up your time pretending like that. And I think so much of YouTube, I'm glad I didn't go there, but what it did give me the opportunity was I offered my free 45-minute consultation to anybody listening, and I ended up having some amazing students that had already done a lot of the work. We had common vocabulary, and so I was able to start to open up about music on a deeper level with them, and using music as a spiritual journey. And I also at the same time sort of started getting pushed out of areas that were way more secular, and I had walked that secular line, but I think even my vibe and all that stuff started to sort of be pushed out from there, and I was okay with that. It was like, okay, I'm going to own it a little bit more, and I'm going to be honest about the fact that I have tried to be in that mindset of just thinking of music as a career and music from a secular 3D perspective, but it was never only that for me. And so a lot of times I was not able to be as honest with people, and in some cases I think that made it more difficult to be in true connection with people. And then I thought, okay, well, the world is changing. It's kind of hard to be lukewarm anymore, and I don't want it to be a lack of courage that keeps me doing that, right? I don't want it to be about self-preservation and me just trying to make sure that I'm not going to say something that somebody's not going to like, and then I don't get a job in the future, right? So many brave people were standing up in the last 4 years for things that they believed in and facing very harsh consequences. And so that's the place where I decided to come when I came with this radio show, Music as a Metaphor. It was like, I don't know exactly the line, but I'm every week going to be in presence with Spirit and truly listen to my intuition, and both ways, right? Like listen to my intuition when I'm meant to speak about something, and listen to it when I'm not meant to speak about something. So that's what hit me so hard when the show just disappeared. It was like, well, where is that coming from, right? Which side? Is it also that I might have said something that was overstepping a boundary? And in particular, it was like maybe this, frequency war, or really getting into the idea of being in a frequency war, or I guess more the proper term of that particular episode is a spiritual warfare. That's really more what it was about. It was coming from a spiritual warfare perspective. And I thought maybe I'm not meant to go there. But taking some time, listening back, I've gone back and I've started to listen to my earlier episodes. I'm on episode 2, and I'm trying to cut it up into little parts to put on YouTube, because I know a lot of people see an hour-long episode and they don't. I do the same thing. I don't have that time. But if I can cut them up into subjects and sound bites, maybe people would be more interested. So, and I'm doing that on episode 2. I'm like, what am I talking about? I've been doing spiritual warfare from day one. It's just that I've been calling it frequency, right? The war on frequency. I've been talking about this from day one with 432 and the Hertz issue. And so what I recognized is that I've been talking about the same subject the whole time. It's just that there's different perspectives and different approaches to talk about it. So I thought maybe what I'll do today is back up. And before I launch into everything I went in on the missing episode from April 16th, maybe it was that I sort of plunged into the deep end of the pool, and that this is more about, taking steps along this pathway, because the way I think about this, I do want to share. And only as my perspective, and only as maybe it's helpful, but not as this is the truth, right? Not as this is the only way to see this, but merely as, let me offer the ways that my mind has come to formulate the situation that we're in and how I'm thinking about it. And this has been a lifelong mosaic, if you will. Like, I've been working on this perspective for some time. So I'm going to just check, because there have been some broadcasting issues. I'm going to keep an eye and make sure that I'm connected and that my mic is on. As we step into what I want to talk about today, which I think will bridge some of the discussions from using, literal sound waves and sound frequency into the idea of spiritual warfare and the sort of unseen realms that are actually very real, even though we don't see them and we don't have proof of them, and most people don't want to talk about them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And the way we're going to discuss it is in a way that I've been thinking about these things for a long time, but once again is only a metaphor to try to understand something that's beyond what our consensus reality will really discuss. And that's the third, fourth, and fifth dimension. Mathematics back in the day, in the late 1800s, mathematicians and physicists, there you go. Mathematicians and physicists came across the idea that there was more than 3 dimensions. It was in the mathematics they were doing, right? And I'm not going to get too much into that in this episode, but this was a lot of the stuff that I was super into in my 20s. From the time I was a little girl, I was very interested in dimensions, and one of them had to do with the fact that we had a very smart neighbor whose parents did not allow him to have a TV, and he always was coming up with, he was just a very smart guy. And I remember being on my front driveway and him specifically talking about how there were different dimensions. And that meant that right in that very space, even though we couldn't see it, there could be like somebody else or a creature right there. We just couldn't see it, but they could be occupying the exact same space. This idea scared me to no end, okay? It freaked me out. But it also piqued a lifelong curiosity that I had for this. So in my early 20s, it might have even been late teens, I was reading about some of this mathematics. And one of the books that I've talked about before, The Dancing Woolly Masters, sort of combined that idea. And it was what I was very interested in, that the ancients and all these ancient cultures, that at the time anthropology was like saying, they're not as smart. Yeah. Well, they had all these theories that actually corresponded to what modern physicists in the last 100 years had been finding out. And that it was just a different language, but you could see how they were talking about the same thing. And in that was the idea of dimensions, that there wasn't just the third dimension, which is what we're aware of, but there was all the way. I've heard for sure up to 10, but I've heard other, I've heard more than that, and I've heard less. Now, this idea, like I said, is over 100 years old. At this point, we're talking probably closer to 150 years old. And so what did that do to society? Well, one of the most interesting things it did was it seeped into the artist. And many people were trying to conceptualize what that fourth dimension and looked like. Because it gets a little tricky with Einstein, because he said that the fourth dimension was time. And so, time and space, right? I think that's how he explained it. But it gets a little bit tricky because he says it one way, but other people have said it other ways. So I'm going to talk more about how I've come to conceptualize it, because that's a large part of what I fell in love with in my early 20s was art history and the idea how these artists were trying to conceptualize what that actually meant, what these higher dimensions would actually be like, because they were real, right? The mathematics proved they were real. The problem was we didn't know how to think of them. We didn't know how to imagine them. And so that was one of the reasons that I liked Cubism as a movement and was about to go back and actually study with somebody that was, focused on that. And the only reason that I didn't really, first of all, I wasn't a huge fan of Cubism as far as the aesthetics of it. But I believe it was also Duchamp who also did a lot of motion. So they were doing it in different ways, right? The Cubist made it like you could see all angles at once. That's one of the things that they're saying about like the fourth dimension or a higher dimension. Like you can see inside to out in a way. You can see all angles at once. And so that's why when you look at a Picasso, it's got like an eye here and this here and everything's all discombobulated. He was sort of trying, but think about it, he's still putting it on 2 dimensions. So a 2-dimensional surface, he's trying to imagine the 4th dimension. That's what he came up with. And I believe it was Duchamp who showed motion. So it'd be like a staircase and then somebody moving up the staircase, but it was just blurry going up the staircase. And that was the 4th dimension. But all this stuff was absolutely fascinating to me. And this was before I got really into studying music. This was just what I was interested in. And like I said, I would have gone back and continued to study in academia pretty seriously if had not been for one of those wonderful coincidental moments where I ran into a guy at Barnes & Noble who had gotten his PhD in anthropology, and he was going through a divorce and just severely regretted all of it. He had massive debt. He couldn't make a living. His family was falling apart. And one of the biggest things he said, and it was also what I saw and what changed my view about the world entirely, was how political it was. That there were certain topics that you could discuss, and if you did, you could get tenure and you could move up the chains. And I think Brett Weinstein's talked pretty exclusively how people can self-regulate or self-censor in those environments. And I saw that because it wasn't just the 4th dimension that I was interested in, and I could have gone that route. But I also at the time was very interested in the idea of Atlantis and Graham Hancock's work, that the pyramids were way older than we thought. And, all of this stuff plays in because it feels like there's ancient technology or ancient understanding about sound and physics that we lost and that we were just coming back to in the last 100 years. And that perspective wasn't in academia. It wouldn't fit in academia. So I got out of academia, and in many ways I've gone different directions. But one of the places that I went hard into for a while was New Age. And in New Age, this was the idea. I came across it again at the 3rd, 4th, and 5th dimension. And I'm going to read you, I found this website because I think there's still a great deal of people who think in this way. And I'm going to explain it. It's the way that maybe is the most conventional New Age way of thinking of it. And I would say it's become part of our consensus because there's so many people who have embraced New Age at this point that I would say maybe it is more part of our consensus, but that's relatively new. For somebody who's been studying this stuff for 25 years, I would say it's maybe more in the last 10, 5, something like that, where way more people don't think this is a crazy idea. They won't zone out if you try to talk about it. Or at least in my world, that seems to be the case. So this is it. Understanding the 3rd dimension from a metaphysical viewpoint can help us grasp these concepts and differentiate between the 3rd, 4th, 5th. Okay, so this is one of the things. Jolie Creighton of Futurism, she says this: dimensions are simply the different facets of what we perceive to be reality. We are immediately aware of the 3 dimensions that surround us on a daily basis, those that define length, width, and depth of all objects in our universe, the X, Y, and Z axes respectively. Beyond these 3 visible dimensions, scientists believe that there may be many more. In fact, the theoretical framework of superstring theory posits that the universe exists in 10 different dimensions which govern the universe. So superstring is a theory that I got into, especially as Brian Greene talks about it. And really it's the idea, for a musician, it's a wonderful idea because it gets to the idea that when you break down the atoms, at our core, we're atoms, right? Which is already vibrating and mostly space. And then you get inside of that, and you, at the very smallest, I can't remember if it's like photons are light, but like break down the neutron or the neutrino. I don't know. I've lost all of my physics understanding at this point. It's been so long since I've really been studying this, but at the very smallest way that you can break down a subatomic particle, you still just have a string vibrating. And that's why some people literally would say, like, we're just vibration. We're just sound. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And so that would be, that it's all just, like, even when you say word, you're talking about the voice, you're talking about a vibration there, right? Vibrational sound. So that's, superstring theory. And superstring theory is one of the biggest proponents of the idea that there's 10. So she's breaking it down further. This author, let me see, it's Sherianna Boyle, which I am not advocating nor coming against in any way. I literally just looked this up to have something to read really fast. And I found her because I've read so much literature over this, and even Magenta Pixie was a good resource for many years on this type of mentality. We're basically just going to break down the third, the fourth, and the fifth dimension. Okay, because in the New Age world, if you're in the New Age world, there's a lot of idea that for years they were saying, like, we lived in the third dimension like a prison, and now we're in this ascension, and part of ascension is becoming aware of the fourth dimension, but ultimately we're trying to get to the fifth dimension. Now, the way she describes it is that the third dimensional frequencies have a slower, denser rate of movement, and these slower rates of movement, this is where suffering can live. This is because lower frequencies are where the energy of fear, ego, and illusion reside. They can be very particular for people with low self-esteem or who are living in high levels of stress. You're more likely to feel separation and powerless in this state of mind. It also says it's important to remember that you have free will, and this means you can consciously choose to move the energy in a way where you can begin to access higher vibrations of love and peacefulness. So the idea is a third dimension is like a prison, basically, but it's a frequency prison. And we get stuck in it through cycles of trauma. I'm adding in here, she's not saying this, but this is my expanded view based off of what she said, that our traumas keep us locked in patterns of low frequency, and then everybody around us is in trauma or fear or low frequency, and it all becomes normal, like Stockholm syndrome. But in reality, we're not actually meant to be in these low places, not forever, not permanently. We're not supposed to be, making our decisions and building our world from that place. And that would maybe be what you'd call the fall. Our consciousness fell into such a low frequency, and it literally is a frequency of fear. And this is why you have so many simplistic, yet truthful, principles of, like, all you need is love. It's like, it's way easier to understand that than to actually do it, to figure out how to raise your frequency. And that's one of the reasons why I advocate playing music, because I feel like playing music is one of the most wonderful ways you can take back your frequency and work to raise it. But that's not to diminish how difficult it is, because like I said, most of us, we were born into it and entrained by our society and our family, and now TV and social media. I mean, so much is coming against you. And that's why, for me, it feels like a conspiracy. Okay. It feels like a spiritual war, because that would be a spiritual war to keep you at a lower level so that you were unable to access your true power, right? You're just basically constantly in pain and suffering. And to a degree that you accept and you think that that's all there is, and that this is life, and that God has wanted this for you. Okay, so that's the third dimension. Now, the fourth dimension, the way she says it, can be accessed through mindful practices such as meditation, art, music, yoga, breathing, writing, walking in nature, and more. So I've talked about this too. With disciplines and practice, 4D frequencies help you dissolve the layers of fear so you can step into your true power. This is where you start learning to function on earth as a being of unlimited possibility. You will naturally detach from money, fame, popularity, as these are illusions held by the third dimensional frequencies. Many people oscillate between the third and fourth. Staying true to your practices will help you hold your energy during turbulent times. So yeah, in a way, what she's saying here, I actually agree with. especially when she's saying staying true to your practices. That's one of the things that I really advocate, is using music as a spiritual practice, because on a daily basis, you're doing things to keep your frequency up. Because one of the things that happens is if you get into fear, it's almost like that's the last thing you think you're in. It's like, it's just so normal. I don't know how to describe it. The best way to say it is like, if you're hungry, if you're one of these people who gets hangry like I do, where it's like, if I don't eat, I start to get really angry, and I don't recognize that it's because I'm hungry. It's just the last thing that I assume, even though I know I haven't eaten, right? But the hangriness takes over, and I just get really angry at whatever I'm really angry at. And I still don't eat, right? I lose. And so I think that can happen. That's where the 3D can be like a real trap, because you get in that low frequency, and then the last thing you think to do is to get out of it. And so when you have these daily practices, they remind you every day, and over time, you start to take back your power. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read what she says about the fifth dimension, but I'm going to also go back and explain where I think that what she has about the fourth and the fifth dimension aren't quite what I would say at this point. I would disagree about some of this, or maybe just add more to it. But let me tell you about the fifth dimension, because I think we're a little bit more in line here. It says, the fifth dimension is where pure unconditional love resides. You know you're in the fifth dimension when you no longer feel the need nor the desire to control or manage what's happening. Bum, bum, bum. That is a beautiful thing. It just is. Instead, you are in awe of the beauty and magic of life. The fifth dimension is like heaven on earth. Some individuals may resist 5D, and that is okay. We all have free will. Yet those of us who are open to receiving five-dimensional energy will greatly benefit. Okay, so I do really agree with her on the fifth dimension, actually, because I think this is where a lot of New Age people are misunderstood. Is that they'll come from a place of like acceptance, and they'll come from a place of, not needing to control, not manage. And a lot of people look at people like that and they think something's wrong with them, right? Or they think that they're la-di-da-di people. And in some ways they're right. But in other ways, I do believe that I believe that when we talk about Christ consciousness, or we talk about Jesus's love, we're talking about the fifth dimension and up. And from a frequency level, what's happened is it's vibrating at such a fine frequency, such a fine vibration, that fear and control and desire for power, all those things just literally can't be there. They can't hang on there. And this is one of the reasons why, if you're somebody who really can access this frequency and maintain it and stay at it, people just bounce off you. Like, the spiritual warfare becomes non-existent for you, because it's just doesn't matter how evil somebody's intent is against you. They cannot affect you. Your frequency is too fine and theirs is too low, and it's like water and oil. It won't mix. It won't match. And so I think that, the getting to the fifth dimension is something that the New Age talks a lot about, and I actually agree with it in many ways. But where I think I depart from them is more in the fourth dimension, because I think that in accepting things, that means truly accepting everything, right? And there's still a lot of spiritual bypassing happening in the spiritual community, and I think in many ways it's been on purpose. I think it's been many of the spiritual teachings. Many things are this way. They're 90% accurate, but the 10% they leave out is important. And in many cases, when they talk about the fourth dimension, it's not the way that I see it. And I'm going to share my perspective. But once again, all of this is just theoretical. So the fourth dimension is more where I do believe like we've kind of merged with it. I guess we've raised our frequency. Many of us have raised our frequency enough to not only be stuck in the third, but in the fourth dimension, there still can be manipulative, evil things happening. And this is where the naivete comes from, because I've mentioned on other shows that when I was in my 20s and supernatural things would happen to me, I just assumed that it was God, and I think that is a little bit of a naive perspective, and it comes from the fact that when you're just trying to break out of materialism, which is basically the third dimension, which we've really been stuck in, especially the baby boomers are such materialists, right? And before that, it was sort of a descent into that place, and then I think now we're coming back out of it. We've been forced out of it in a way. But third dimension could be considered material. It's like what you can see. Everything's limited to what you can see here with your five senses, right? There's no sixth, seventh sense. And from that perspective, from that third dimension or that materialism, like you have to work really hard to get out of it. Or listen, the young people now, you probably don't, okay? And you probably can't relate to what it was like to be around in the 80s and the 90s. But you had to go really against the grain to even see there was anything beyond this three-dimensional world. And so when you experienced something beyond it, you didn't have any categories for it. You didn't have any I mean, maybe if you had a biblical perspective, I'm not going to say nobody did. I'm just going to say mainstream, the way I was raised. If it was beyond the third dimension, I thought it was God. And I didn't understand that there can actually be supernatural on both sides of the coin. Just the way we have good and bad in this third dimension, I believe that there still is good and bad in the fourth dimension. My belief is that maybe by the fifth dimension, the vibration is too high, and that evil or bad or, whatever you want to call that lower type of frequency, it's out, right? By the very nature, it's a lower frequency and it can't be there. But the fourth dimension is tricky. The fourth dimension is very, very tricky because it basically, I think it's where some of this supernatural stuff comes from, right? So the theory now, and I'm going to get into David Icke a little bit here, even though I'm not advocating any of these people, but I want to be able to discuss things because I think we need to have these discussions. And David Icke is very, very good at explaining something. I think he's one of the best at explaining the idea of the frequency and not being able to see these beings that are just out of our frequency, right? And that gets into the electromagnetic spectrum. And the idea that everything is energy, but we as human beings can only see and hear a very, very small portion of it. And so it's very possible, just like my friend said when I was very young, to occupy the same space as a being that is vibrating at a different frequency and able to cloak themselves from me, right? And this would be the whole nature of entities. And this is where it's been getting really confusing the last 5, 6, maybe 10 years of, are we talking about, aliens? Are we talking about extra dimensional beings? Are we talking about just the fallen angels and the demons of old that got disembodied, no longer have physical bodies? So they're there, and, as they say, like the prince of the air, they're there, but we're not able to see them, and they're always trying to get back. And, New Age is always trying to get to the fifth dimension. But what if there's these beings that are trying to get into 3 dimension? We don't think about these things. So that's why I'm saying that New Age has a lot of interesting perspectives, but I don't think it has the full perspective. And it can be dangerous in that way because one of the things that happened to me is opening yourself up to all of this stuff, assuming it's all God, and not having the discernment to recognize the difference between a unifying, loving frequency and the trickery that can happen in the fourth dimension. And there's a lot of trickery. And you can get good at discerning it, but you got to know that you got to learn to discern it. And if you don't even know that, and you're just from the space of the fourth dimension is just a place to meditate, and why not astral voyage there? It's like you're thinking of it all as an expansion, but maybe it's just an oversimplified view. So that's where this comes full circle back into frequency war or spiritual war. We're really talking about the same thing because in a way, spiritual could be seen as maybe things vibrating at a finer vibration, and so they're not as tangible in our world. But that also could be a result of a fallen world. It might have been that before we fell into this trap of the 3D or this lower frequency, all of that was unified. And it wasn't only the fifth dimension, it was the fifth dimension and the third dimension. And what the fourth dimension would be in that, I don't know. My like I said, it was just a theory, and it maybe falls short. But I would say maybe the fourth dimension acts like a bridge between the two, between a higher vibration and a lower vibration. And I would also say that the fourth dimension has maybe been a prison for certain entities that don't have humanity's best interest at heart. And that's where this war comes from. I do believe that I found many, many answers only in the last 4 years through more of a biblical perspective. And this is after many, many years of being in New Age and studying about aliens and just knowing there was truth to it. And that's why, like, I'm still a work in progress. I'm still trying to understand these things, and I'm merely presenting them here today because I do feel like being aware of the idea that we are unaware of a lot can save people's lives at this point, because it's just come, for those that have eyes to see, it feels very real that we're in a war. Whereas 20 years ago, it was sort of harder to recognize that you were in a war. I think you only felt that way if you were really coming up against the Matrix. And that would be another metaphor, is saying like the third dimension is like the Matrix, right? But that we can actually exist outside of the Matrix, we've just forgotten how. And that when you try, so much of this Matrix comes against you, including your friends and family, unbeknownst to them even. The whole Agent Smith thing, which I've talked about, but I probably should clarify, meaning that like they're kind of taken over. You know, there's something compelled in them. It's like she was saying that fifth dimension is unattractive to some people. Like, let's say you are trying to go to the fifth dimension and you're doing it and your vibration is getting finer. That can feel like somebody's eyes who hasn't seen the dark, and all of a sudden the sun's shining in it and it hurts and they shy away and they push away from it. You can have friends and family doing that from a very unconscious place the minute you start to really, really seriously do this work of reclaiming your own power and your own authority, which is what we're asked to do by Jesus. We're asked to, be the body of Christ and to stand up with him and to do our part. But once again, we always end up going back into a materialist thing, and, we end up interpreting it through our very limited perspectives. And when we do that, it causes all this division. It's like it can all be used. It can be like that 90 to 10. You can have something 90% correct, but the 10% that you have wrong is actually damaging and harmful. So I want to make sure that I'm presenting all of this as just a thought experiment today, and maybe it will help you to have your own thought experiment today. But there's only really one point I'm trying to make, and that is that you are not meant to feel this suffering. We're not meant to feel this suffering all the time. And then if you recognize it, or you see it as something's gone wrong and we're in a war, then it actually is more hopeful. I mean, it's a terrible thought to think we're in a war, but it can also be very hopeful that, that we could get out of it, that this isn't the way we're supposed to be. This isn't how life is meant to be lived. And that you aren't meant to be suffering all the time. And it doesn't make it any easier, to be honest with you. I think it still makes things very difficult, but at least it can help you to reclaim your true purpose and your power as to what you are doing here and how you can truly serve and help. Because I think most human beings truly do want to. And we're in the middle of such a mess right now. And I think the Spirit is telling me that that's as far as I need to go today on that subject. See, when I talk about this, it's amazing. I can just talk and talk and talk. It's already been 45 minutes. So any questions about that, I'd love to hear. And I'm certainly going to be talking about it more. But I do find, to bring the whole topic full circle, I find music to be one of the weapons that we have in this war. And it's an incredible weapon, and it's a weapon that's meant for everybody. It's not meant for the beautiful people or the talented people or the cool people or the ones that were smart enough to pick it up as a child and keep playing. Any age, any person can get involved with music, and it can make a huge difference in your life because it's meant to. It's meant to be a gift for you to take. Now, some people might be more connected to that gift than others, and that gets into the idea of if we're in a symphony, like let's say that just like the body of Christ metaphor works, so does a symphony. Like we're all meant to be playing our part. And when we are, we're helping each other to play our parts in tune, right? And we're inspiring each other. And the more of us that sit down at that symphony chair and pick up our instrument, the more that we can right this ship, right? The more that we can try to figure out truly what it would be like, to live in the Garden of Eden if the promises of God were completely fulfilled to us. what would that look like? Can we start to imagine that direction rather than, what I fall prey to too, imagining the end of the world and imagining, the suffering and imagining all the terrible things that seem to be constantly threatened at us. But that's one thing that I'll say is that I think the enemy only really has threats once you truly accept that what Christ did on the cross was for all of us and that it was a victory. And that maybe this is where, the fourth dimension of time, can kind of stand outside of it for a minute and accept it and get to that fifth dimension and accept it. Even when it right in front of your face, it doesn't seem to be the case. It feels like things are getting way worse, actually. But when you're able to step outside of that and really speak to the power of Christ in your life, then that enables you to step up into who you were meant to be and what you were meant to be. And when we're doing this, we have to be careful to not look at each other and think, okay, I'm going to tell you what you're supposed to do based on what I know I'm meant to do. No, I mean, that's the evangelical way. And that's part of what's just torn apart religion and Christianity and all the fighting and all the this and that is so many times that is our ego taking over again. That's that trickery again, making us think that we're doing the right thing. But in reality, we're not, any one of us is not meant to have the full picture. If we're down here and we're in a body, we don't have the full picture. The best we can do is have faith. And that faith can, we can hold steady to that faith, and that faith will guide our actions, and it will guide when we're meant to encourage another brother and sister. But we're very, very limited, and we have to have faith in each other, that each other knows what they need, that your connection to God, your connection to Christ is what will guide you to lead you to your action. And it might look very different from what I think you should be doing. Right? But I'm very limited and I'm full of sin, and I'm very much just trying to, walk the path that God has given for me. I certainly don't have the authority to go around telling everybody else what they should be doing. So that's not what I'm meant to be doing here today. And I bring that up because I've even seen that a lot in the truther community. And I've seen that a lot with people saying, oh, you should be speaking out on this, or you should be doing this. And by now, like 4 years later, it's starting to really reveal itself. A lot of people are kind of showing their true colors. But that's not really the way it's meant to be, right? I mean, that's where sometimes I still go back to New Age a little bit, or just some of the things that I learned from New Age, which would be like being present and really honoring other people and really connecting on a level where everything's working out exactly the way it should, and that you can stop listening to all the thoughts and the opinions of your own ego. You can get pretty good, through meditation of being able to weed that out and not coming online and coming from that place, because now you're just adding to the noise and you're just adding to the confusion. And so much of the confusion is coming from the enemy at this point. So many people are so confused, and I'm one of them, about what we should be doing, where we should be. I deal with that all the time. So I don't want to come on here and spread that confusion. There's really only one thing that I'm super clear about, and that is that actually, I guess I'm not really sure what I'm not clear about. That's funny now that I think about that. What am I super clear about? I'm super clear that music is a portal to higher dimensions, and that it can be used for both good and bad from our vantage point, and that we might want to get to that place of the fifth dimension, but we won't get there by spiritually bypassing what's in front of us. We actually have to accept what's in front of us. We have to let go of our ideals, that our own limitations, and truly become faithful servants of Christ and play the part that we were meant to play. Every single moment obedient. And that's scary for me to admit that here. I've been very, very quiet. I've been very personal with that. But I'm going to trust now that it's what I was meant to say today. And that through teaching music, through bringing some of my thoughts about all of this, that I'll be able to help somebody, even if it's just one other person. Because if I'm helping one other person to step up into who they truly are, then they can help somebody else step up into who they truly are. And really, it doesn't have to take the whole world. I've heard this many, many times, because the frequency is so much higher and finer when you're vibrating in a love space or a unity space, that it doesn't have to be the exact numbers, right? It doesn't. I've heard that at one point. For years, New Age was like, oh, we're at 51%. Thank God. 51% is vibrating at a higher frequency. There's all these claims in New Age for many years, and now we're in the new earth. I don't know if any of that's true. I'll be honest with you. To me, I'm still in a day-to-day battle for my mind. And that is where maybe the fourth dimension, another place maybe we could think of the fourth dimension, is inside of our own minds. And that is where the spiritual warfare, the frequency warfare, is trying to get. So if you're looking for something today, if you need something to help you, to hold the line, to remember the love that you are, remember that you're not alone, I'm going to recommend music. And I'm going to recommend you listen to it. I'm going to recommend you try to play it. I'm going to recommend you sing, even if you sound absolutely terrible. I'm going to recommend that you get out into some nature and that you sing out there, or you listen to the singing and the music of nature. Oh my gosh, the sounds of nature are just extraordinary, way beyond what man has been able to do. So do those things for you today if you need it. And I'm bringing that up because I'll be honest with you, the last few days, I got hit pretty hard and I needed to rest. There's just a lot going on, and there's a lot to be afraid of, and there's a lot grabbing our attention, and there's a lot of uncertainty, but there's a place inside of you, inside of your own mind, that you can get to where love is the truth. And it makes all of the rest of this truly seem like an illusion. And you can dissolve that illusion through the power of your authority of reclaiming that space in your mind. And if you're listening to this today, then you are probably closer than you think. Because frequency-wise, I don't think you would have been sticking with me this long through this discussion if that weren't the case. So I want to encourage you on that. And I guess that's a lot of what this show is really about, because I do really want to reclaim music. I want to make a David's Army band where it's people whose hearts are in the right place and they're playing music from the right place. And it's the kind of people where it said, like, they're not interested in fame or money or, what did it say here? You're already detached from money, fame, and popularity because you see them as illusions, not because you're sacrificing them, because you truly just see it as illusion, right? A vibrating string, not that important, but that you can play music from a place of love and unity, and that those vibes will go out. So I want to inspire David's Army Band, but I also want to inspire anybody who just needs encouragement right now, because for whatever reason, it really feels like we're in the thick of it. And I have more theories on all of that. I've got theories on everything. But I'm going to spare you because I want to honor your time. And I'm going to stop there and just talk a little bit about the fact that my piano that's been tuned to 432, which is, also about frequency, right? But from a more fourth dimensional, third dimensional place. And that is what I find, is that the metaphor works, the symbol works. Like, things from the fifth dimension can be like symbolic, whereas they're actually physical, but they're somewhat the same energy. And so from a spiritual or a fifth dimensional place, the vibrations are really high and fine. But from a fourth dimensional place, there's a lot of manipulation in frequency through things that are both, fine and very tangible. And maybe that's like what you get off of a TV or the 5G or all that kind of stuff. It's for real, right? It's like I'm literally mean a frequency at that point. But when I'm talking about it from another perspective, it's like being trapped in lower frequency versus being able to vibrate at a love frequency, which truly is our natural place. It truly is our natural state. It's just that we've forgotten that. And that's why I talk a lot about remembering who you are, because it's more natural than you think. It's so wild. It's so wild, this world that we live in, I tell you what. And it's not for the faint of heart. So anybody who's out there surviving, I just want to send some love to you and some encouragement. And I want to speak about the fact that my piano is, maybe you heard or you didn't hear, I tuned it to 432 a while ago, and I wasn't sure how well it was keeping. And so what I've decided to do is buy some tuning forks, because if I get my tuner out again, I think I might try 444 this time, just because it's better for my singers that I'm teaching, rather than being, some of them have pretty good ears and they can tell it's lower at 432. But I also have been playing on other pianos, and I've noticed one of the reasons I thought I was really out of tune is I'm playing Top Gun Maverick, the theme song, because I freaking love that movie. Watched it again last night. Whenever I'm in a really bad space, I can watch that movie, which is so crazy. I know, but once again, you can't decide for me and I can't decide for you what's right? For whatever reason, I understand this movie is propaganda to the nth degree, but I freaking love it. And it pumps me up, and the song pumps me up. But there's these pedal C's, right? Octave low C's. And it starts to be like this sound. And whenever that happens, I was thinking it was because it was the 432 tuning. But I've been playing on other pianos recently, and I realize it's not. I don't know why they're doing that pedal like that. It actually sounds really bad to keep the C like that. Or maybe all these pianos are out of tune, but trust me, the ones I'm playing on were not tuned to 432, so I can't blame it on that. So in Ventures and 432, I'm getting some tuning forks, 432 and 444. Some of them are pretty cheap on eBay. Some of them are more expensive. So I haven't quite done that yet. I'm sort of looking at it, and then I'm going to have my tuner come back out and do another tuning. So keep you posted on that. But also just having the tuning forks to sing with, to intone with, which is something that I work with some of my students on, especially the more spiritually minded ones, is intoning, right? Just holding like holding tones from an intuitive perspective, but using these tuning forks for that work as well. And also because even though I dream of having a piano out in nature one day that I could play, that's a very rare occasion for me, whereas I'm singing out in nature a lot. So I'm going to start bringing these tuning forks with me. So that'll be exciting. Now, what we didn't get to today, that we're going to talk to about next week, is the major scale. We're going to review it a little bit and talk about how it corresponds to key signature. And I also I want to do a full episode on proper approaches to teaching music, because I've been seeing a lot of parents that aren't quite sure. It's something I do over and over again, right? Talk to parents about music lessons. So I want to offer some advice here, and largely it's based on some Reggio Emilio ideas, but it's basically a balance, right? A balance between knowing when to provide structure for your child and discipline, and when to allow the child to lead and go with their guidance and their, in some cases, whims, right? So we're going to talk more about that in some upcoming episodes. So I plan to be here every week. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if this episode made it through. You just never know. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for all that you're doing out there to raise the frequency, because we are truly only responsible for our own frequency. But once we're able to reclaim our frequency and be the authority of it and choose through our free will to raise our frequency, that is what changes the world and helps to raise the frequency, the collective frequency, which could change everything for us overnight. And truly, I think we need that kind of miracle now. In the meantime, I hope you're able to sing. Trying to play my theme song, but it won't work. How can I keep from singing? Yeah, the technology sometimes feels like it's going to keep me from singing. But nope, I am going to stand in my authority. This is Lyndol Descant. Music as a metaphor. Take care. keep from seeing.